Let's take a journey through the twisted and shocking world of video games that will make you question the sanity, the morals, and possibly even the life choices of these game devs. These games are so menacing it made parents panic, politicians pontificate, and pundits protest. Welcome, my dear viewers, to a world where pixels bleed, controllers smash, and parents despair. Today we delve into the disturbing universe of controversial video games, a realm where virtual bullets fly faster than the speed of light, and digital gore splatters like a poorly made smoothie. But fear not, for we are not here to condemn all these games. We are here to explore them, to unravel their mysteries, and to ask the important question, why on earth would someone create these? So sit back, grab a bag of popcorn, or something stronger depending on your age, and join us on this journey into the dark side of gaming. This is the disturbing world of controversial video games. But first, are you subscribed? No? Everyone watching this video isn't subscribed, so please sub to the channel so I can feed my 50 children. But what makes a video game controversial? Well, it can be a lot of things. Sometimes it's the game's subject matter, like violence, sex, or drugs. Other times it's the game's mechanics, like the ability to commit crimes or harm innocent NPCs. And of course, there's always the issue of cultural sensitivity, with games that feature stereotypes or caricatures of different groups. But controversy in video games is nothing new. In fact, it dates all the way back to the earliest days of gaming. The first controversial video game ever made was Death Race, originally titled Pedestrian, released by Exidy in 1976. The game was a black and white arcade game where players drove a car and had to run over gremlins that were meant to represent pedestrians. The goal of the game was to run over as many gremlins as possible within a time limit, and each gremlin was worth points. The game immediately sparked controversy and backlash, with critics arguing that it promoted violence and encouraged players to harm innocent people. Some even claimed that the game was sick and morally corrupt. The controversy around Death Race grew so intense that it eventually caught the attention of the mainstream media, including major news outlets like the New York Times.
Even better than movies and television for getting into the act is your local pinball parlor. It provides an endless variety of methods for a little synthetic killing. It's all harmless fun, says the Californian who devised Death Race. In Los Angeles, Paul Jacobs.
Death Race really is fantasy, and nothing more than that. And we don't try to depict anything that really happens in real life. Well, first of all, just a new twist into the game. We took the cabinet, painted it black, and tried to project skeletons or gremlins running across the graveyard. And what happened now is when you drove your automobile, you ran into a skeleton. He emitted somewhat of a shriek, turned into a grave marker. And that's how we changed the game, and the sales went up quite a bit.
All right, it's not a Volkswagen, it's not a Christmas tree. All right, it's a human being. Is it harmful? To the extent that it again sanctions practice, training, learning how to hurt, kill other people, it sets the stage for when people are instigated to aggression to use those skills that they have.
In response to the public outcry, some arcades removed the game from their premises, while others added barriers around the machine to prevent young children from seeing the gameplay. Despite the controversy, Death Race proved to be a commercial success for Exidy, earning the company millions of dollars in revenue. While Death Race may seem tame by today's standards, it was a groundbreaking game in its time, and paved the way for more controversial and boundary-pushing games to come. In many ways, it set the template for the type of moral panic and media scrutiny that has followed controversial video games ever since. But it was the late 90s and early 2000s that really saw an explosion of controversial games. From the hyper-violent Postal series, to the crazy Leisure Suit Larry games, to the satirical but still offensive Grand Theft Auto franchise, these games pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in the gaming world. We can't talk about controversial games without talking about Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is a fighting game franchise that has been the subject of controversy and scrutiny since its inception in 1992. Developed by Midway Games, the original game introduced a unique and gruesome feature that set it apart from other fighting games at the time: fatalities. Fatalities are graphic finishing moves that players can perform on their opponents once they've defeated them. These moves often involve and other forms of extreme violence. The inclusion of fatalities in Mortal Kombat made it a lightning rod for controversy, with critics arguing that the game was too violent and gory for young players. The controversy around Mortal Kombat grew so intense that it caught the attention of the United States Congress, which held a series of hearings on the issue of video game violence. The hearings culminated in the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, ESRB, which is responsible for rating video games based on their content. Despite the controversy, Mortal Kombat proved to be a commercial success, spawning numerous sequels and spin-offs over the years. The franchise has also had a major impact on popular culture, with characters like Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Raiden becoming iconic figures in the world of gaming. Today, Mortal Kombat remains one of the most controversial and influential video game franchises of all time. While the violence and gore of the original game may seem tame compared to modern games, its impact on the industry and popular culture cannot be overstated. Now let's talk about the most controversial video games.
What is important is what I'm going to do.
Imagine a video game so controversial that it made headlines before it was even released. A game that was so reviled, so detested, that it threatened to tear apart the entire industry. That game is Hatred, a game that caused a firestorm of controversy when it was announced in 2014. Developed by Destructive Creations, Hatred is a shooter game that puts players in the shoes of a mass murderer. The game's main character, known only as the antagonist, goes on a killing spree, targeting innocent civilians and law enforcement officers alike. The game's graphic violence and dark subject matter immediately drew the ire of gamers, critics, and politicians alike. Despite the controversy, Destructive Creations refused to back down, arguing that Hatred was a work of artistic expression and that they had the right to create and release the game. The debate around Hatred became so heated that Valve, the company behind the popular digital storefront Steam, briefly removed the game from their platform before ultimately reversing their decision. When the game was released in June 2015, it was met with mixed reviews from critics. Some praised the game for its uncompromising vision and technical achievements, while others criticized it for its gratuitous violence and lack of substance. The game's sales were modest, but it became a lightning rod for debate around the limits of free speech in video games. In the end, Hatred proved to be a divisive and polarizing game that pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in the video game industry. While the game may not have been the masterpiece that its creators envisioned, it served as a powerful reminder of the power of video games as an art form and of the importance of artistic freedom and expression in our society. Picture this, it's the early 90s, and video games are quickly becoming a mainstream form of entertainment. But with the rise in popularity comes a rise in controversy. One game in particular, Night Trap, became a hotspot for debate around the effects of violence and sexual themes in video games. This game had parents up in arms, calling for it to be banned. So what was Night Trap, and why was it so controversial? Developed by Digital Pictures for the Sega CD, Night Trap is a game that puts players in the role of a security officer, monitoring a group of teenagers in a house under attack by vampires. The gameplay involves using a series of traps to capture the vampires and protect the teenagers. While the game's premise may seem tame by today's standards, it was considered highly controversial at the time of its release. The controversy surrounding Night Trap centered on its graphic violence and sexual themes. The game's use of live-action footage, which made the violence seem more realistic, drew criticism from parents and politicians alike. The game was even featured in a Senate hearing on video game violence, with lawmakers using it as an example of the harmful effects of video games on young people. Despite the controversy, Night Trap proved to be a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies. The game's controversy only helped to increase its popularity, with many gamers seeking it out simply to see what all the fuss was about. The game also became a symbol of the ongoing debate around video game violence and its effects on society. Today, Night Trap is remembered as one of the most controversial video games of all time. While its graphics and gameplay may seem primitive by modern standards, its impact on the video game industry and the ongoing debate around violence in video games cannot be overstated. It's time to talk about a game that pushed the boundaries of violence in video games to a whole new level. A game that had politicians and parents calling for its removal from store shelves. A game that had me giggling in despair as I just caught my 50th body. That game is Manhunt, a game that caused a nationwide uproar when it was released in 2003. Developed by Rockstar Games, the same studio behind the Grand Theft Auto series, which is also another controversial game series, Manhunt is a game that puts players in the role of a death row inmate forced to participate in a series of snuff films for a deranged director. The gameplay involves sneaking up on and brutally killing enemies using a variety of weapons and environmental hazards. The controversy surrounding Manhunt centered on its graphic violence and realistic depictions of murder. The game's use of stealth and executions, which involved using plastic bags, glass shards, and other weapons to kill enemies, drew criticism from parents and politicians alike. The game was even blamed for inspiring real-world acts of violence, with some media outlets calling it a murder simulator, which in my opinion is very fun. Despite the controversy, Manhunt proved to be a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies. The game's controversy only helped to increase its popularity, with many gamers seeking it out simply to see what all the fuss was about. However, the game was banned in several countries, including Germany, Australia, and New Zealand, and its sequel, Manhunt 2, was initially banned in several countries before being heavily censored for release. Today, Manhunt is remembered as one of the most controversial video games of all time. While its graphic violence may seem tame by today's standards, its impact on the video game industry and the ongoing debate around violence in video games cannot be overlooked.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
Ladies and gentlemen, get ready to enter the world of Postal, a game that caused controversy and uproar when it was released in 1997. This game was so controversial that it even earned a spot on the worst games of all time list, but we'll let you be the judge of that. Developed by Running with Scissors, Postal puts players in the shoes of a mentally unstable man who goes on a killing spree after being evicted from his home. The gameplay involves gunning down innocent bystanders and police officers, setting fire to buildings, and even urinating on the corpses of victims. The controversy surrounding Postal stemmed from its graphic violence and overall disturbing content. The game was accused of glorifying violence and promoting immoral behavior. Critics called it an exercise in brutality and a sick and twisted game. Some even claimed that playing Postal could turn a person into a violent criminal. The public and media reacted strongly to Postal, with protests and calls for the game to be banned. Several countries banned the game outright, including Australia and New Zealand. The game was also pulled from store shelves in many places, and some retailers even refused to carry it. Despite the controversy, Postal gained a cult following among gamers who were drawn to its extreme violence and dark humor. The game spawned several sequels and even a movie adaptation. So, was Postal really the worst game of all time, or was it unfairly maligned by critics and the media? We'll let you decide, but one thing's for sure, Postal will forever be remembered as one of the most controversial video games ever made. We've taken a deep dive into some of the most controversial video games in history. From Death Race to Postal, these games have sparked outrage and debates about the role of violence and morality in gaming. While some may argue that these games are just harmless entertainment, others believe that they promote violence and immoral behavior. Regardless of your stance, it's clear that these games have had a lasting impact on the gaming industry and on popular culture. As we continue to push the boundaries of what is acceptable in gaming, it's important to consider the potential impact of these games on players and on society as a whole. So, let's keep the conversation going and explore the complexities of gaming and its relationship with society. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the disturbing world of controversial video games.